Alright, so I'm making this video. I previously did a video on laying out a website on a 6 column grid, um, but I quickly realized sort of how limiting 6 columns was in terms of the different types of layouts we could do. So I really wanted to sort of shift from a 6 column grid to a 12 column grid, which may sort of on its face seem more complicated than a 6 column grid, but I would argue is actually easier to understand because you've got so many more options with a 12 column grid. You're able to um, create more diverse layouts when you're working with 12 columns as opposed to 6 columns, just because of the math. So just to quickly show you what I mean by a 12 column grid, this is an example of just um, a blank 12 column grid. And so as you're in sort of the planning phase or the design pre-development phase of your website, you'd want to build out some wireframes or some sketches on this 12 column grid. And just sort of subsequently, we'll talk about a grid that I created by myself in CSS. But if you're someone that works in Bootstrap CSS or is interested in Bootstrap, Bootstrap also works on a 12 column grid as well. So basically what you see here is 12 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So these are the columns in pink. And essentially what we do in CSS is we set, we create several styles for div classes that will span any number of columns. So for example, in CSS we'll create a column called div class 11, and that will span across 11 columns out of 12. So it'll be pretty wide, versus div class 1, which will only span across one column, one of these 12 columns. And so you can kind of see how that's really helpful in creating your layouts, because you've got so many different options, right? So if you wanted something that spanned 2 columns, you would insert a div class 2. If you wanted something to span 4 columns, you would insert a div class 4. So the idea here is that you're really sort of laying out the idea is that you've already sort of sketched out your layout, you've wireframed your layout, and you've kind of have an idea of what you want it to look like, but sort of how are we going to make this happen in HTML and CSS. So this is what we're going to be designing on a 12 column grid. Just for the purposes of this video, there's this really great website that I came across from one of these like Smashing Magazine or some other list of websites called Escape Committee. And the reason why I like this site, one, it's just a really good illustration of a site on a grid. So you can see it's very grid-like. We've got boxes that are arranged in different ways on a grid. And so what I'm going to do in sort of a two-part video is, one, just lay this site out using boxes, and then in the second video what I'll do is I'll actually pull some of these images and actually try to make it look more like the Escape Committee site. Overall though, the main idea is to not recreate the site. It's to just kind of show you what it looks like to lay something out on a grid like this. So maybe it won't look identical to the Escape Committee site, but it'll be similar. We'll sort of draw inspiration from this site. So the first thing we'll do now is we will walk through some of the code that I've created. Okay, so let's take a look at the code. And this is sort of a grid system that I've set up. Let me word wrap this. So this is a grid system that I've set up. You can find this on my website. You can find this link to my website in the comments below the video. But basically what I've done is I've set up my own 12 column grid in CSS. So if you are someone that's interested in implementing this grid, that's fairly easy to use, as I'll demonstrate. You can just literally copy and paste this entire bit of CSS into the beginning or the end of your CSS file, and the grid will be ready to roll. So let me just really quickly walk through kind of what the CSS is doing, and then we'll move on to sort of marking up this escape committee site. So first of all, this is the way that I've got it laid out is using a container. So a container that would open immediately after the body opens and close immediately or just before the body closes. This is a container. You can change the width to whatever sort of width you're comfortable with, and you can even make this a fluid grid by making this width just 100% or whatever percentage you would want the width of your website to be. Okay, so this is all presupposed on a container div. What you see here is a bunch of bit of code for first child elements, and essentially what this does is if you've created a row, the first column in that row, we want to have a margin left of 0. So we want it to butt up to the very left of our layout. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll just walk through each of these different classes here. And so you'll notice we've got 11 we have class 11 all the way down to 1. But you might notice, well, this is a 12 column grid. Where's the class for 12? Well, interestingly, 12 would just be a width of 100%. So if you've got something that you want to span just the entire width of your container, you would just create a new row. You wouldn't have to call it 12. You would just create a new row. So with that in mind, let's just quickly walk through 11 all the way down. So basically what we've done here is we've got a margin left of 2%. And I did a little bit of math, and you can actually, there's websites that I'll probably link to in the bottom of the video too, that will allow you to, it will give you the percentages for each of these classes depending on how much margin you'd like. So I just have a default margin of 2%. Some people say you should have a margin of 1.6% because there's some math involved in that. But I just thought it might be easier just to do a margin left of 2%. So basically what we're doing here is we're setting a width for each of these columns. So again, 11 will be essentially 11 out of 12 columns, so it'll be pretty wide. So our width there is 91.5%, and then we're floating every one of these columns left. So if we float them all left, if we've got multiple columns, they're going to sort of stack next to each other the way that columns are supposed to stack next to each other. And then when we create a new row, then we've got this clear both on here, which basically will stop the columns from stacking, and it will start a new row. So we've got 11, 10's 83%, 9's 74.5. I don't have to go through all of these, but you can kind of get the idea. So if you want sort of a 2-column layout, each with half the each spanning half the screen, basically what you can do is you can just do 2 div class 6s. You can do 2 classes of 6, and those will be columns sort of stacked next to each other. Okay, so that's the grid. Again, you can just, I'll give you this code. You can just go ahead and paste this into your CSS, and then you can adjust it accordingly, right? So maybe you want to change the margin, or maybe you want, maybe you don't want a margin left 0 on the first column of a row. Maybe you want it to also have a margin left of 2%. So you can play around with this, and that will be up to you to do, but that's just sort of an introduction to the code. Okay, so now what I want us to do then is I want us to sort of just recreate in boxes. So again, I'm not going to actually recreate the entire site. We'll save that for the next video. But we'll just create sort of placeholder boxes for this particular layout. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just create placeholder boxes for this particular layout. So the first thing we want to do then is to count the number of rows in our layout. So again, if you've already wireframed your site, we're going to pretend that we're going to wireframe. We're using this sort of site as a inspiration for our wireframe. And we're going to count the number of rows. So we've got one row, this sort of header row, two rows, this sort of hero banner, three rows, four rows, five rows, six rows, seven rows, and eight rows. So we've got 8 total rows in this site. So the first thing we'll do is, and I'll provide this HTML document for you as well in the comments below, linked to my website. But the first thing we'll do is we'll just add those 8 rows. So what we're seeing here is I've just got a sort of skeleton for an HTML page. And we're seeing here is our div class container, which I explained earlier. And what we'll do is we'll just create 8 rows. So I'm just going to create those 8 rows. And I'm going to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And what I'll do is after each of these, I'm going to comment in, and this is just a good practice, what these closing divs are for. So we're closing row 1 here, we're closing row 2 here, closing row 3 here. And this will be just good for once we start to get a little more complicated in styling things and adding content. And it looks like I missed a row. So again, those comments can be helpful to kind of tell you what you've missed. So, oh no, I didn't miss a row. I just missed labeling a row. Sorry about that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so I'm going to save that. And that's not going to do anything to your code. All we've done is we've inserted our 8 rows. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 rows. So the next thing we want to do is we want to decide how many columns are in each row. And so the first 2 rows look like just one column, right? So you've just got something that spans the entire width of the row, right? So we don't really have to do anything special to the, we don't have to insert any classes for any columns because we're really just looking at one column here. So what we'll do then is we'll just, we'll call this, so what we'll do is we'll call this the header. And so we'll insert the header inside this first row. And the reason why we want to not just put our content inside of div class row is that we wouldn't be able to style it properly, right? So if we added this sort of reddish orange background color to the row, that would be added to every row, and we wouldn't want that, right? So we would want to just add that reddish orange color to the header and not every row. So I'm going to create this header. I'm going to put the escape committee in H1, and then they've got this navigation bar with projects about and journal. So I'm going to create a nav. And actually, I'm not going to create that content yet. I'm just going to leave it at that. Okay, so we'll create that content in the next video, but that's our first row. So we've created our first row in HTML. The second row we'll call, we want to add another div inside if we want to style it, and we'll call this one hero image. Hero image is just sort of a really big image on the home page. You might argue that this isn't a hero image, but I'm just going to call it hero image. And besides that, I'm just going to put this message in here. There's always a story behind the surface, so that you can see stuff inside of the div, right? So this is where div hero image is closed. So again, the first two rows, there's no columns, right? So we just have our header, we've got our hero image. Now let's move on to row 3. And this is where it gets a little trickier. So in row 3, we've got 3 columns. You can see 3 boxes here and 3 columns. And in row 3, it looks like this column spans half the page, maybe a little less, but we'll just call it half. And these 2 columns span a third. Oh, I'm sorry. These 2 columns together span the other half of the page. Okay. So again, if the whole page is 12, this is half of 12. It's because we said it's half of the page. It's 6 columns, and these 2 together make half of the page. So these are 3 and 3. So within our rows, our columns all have to always add up to 12 if we want them to go all the way across the page evenly. Not evenly, but all the way across the page. So this is half the page, so it will be div class 6. This is half of half, so that will be div class 3. And this is half of half, that will be div class 3. So 6 plus 3 is 9, plus 3 is 12. Okay, so that's how we'll mark up row 3. So what we want to do is then we'll just insert div class 6. And again, let's use our commenting. So this is closing column 6. And then we will do, I'm just going to copy and paste, oops, I'm sorry. I'm just going to copy and paste that twice. And we'll call this 3 and 3. So closing column 3, closing column 3. Okay? So what we've got here now is, just want to clean this up a little bit. So what we've got here now is a row, this row, row 3, and we've got a column, div class 6, which is this thing, another column, div class 3, and div class 3. Okay, and so what we'll do now is I am going to, you know what, we'll just leave it like that for now. And then let's move on to the next one. So this is the 4th row here. And again, we've got 3 columns, but they're in sort of a different order, right? So, oops, click that on accident. They're in a different order. But interestingly, so this middle one seems to span half the page. So this is a 6, and these ones on the right and left are 3s. So it's a similar math, because we've got 6, 3, 3 up here. But in the next row, it's 3, 6, 3. Okay. So what we'll do is we can just actually take this for row 4 and copy and paste the entire thing and change the order, right? So we're going 3, 6, 3. And then we have to change our comments. So 3, 6, and 3. So row 5 then, or I'm sorry, row 3, row 4, gosh, I'm sorry. Row 4 then is going to be done. Great. So row 4 is done. Let's move on to row 5. And row 5 has evenly spaced, excuse me, evenly spaced columns. And so these have to be 3 each. So since there's 4 columns and there's 12 total columns in the grid, 12 divided by 4 is 3, right? So this would be 3, 3, 3, and 3. So let's do that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, first I'm going to clean this up a little bit. I'm sorry. I'm OCD. I'm going to just copy and paste this. But I'm going to change them all to 3, and I'm going to add one more since there's 4 columns. Okay, so 3, 3, 3, and 3. So that's row 5. done with row 5, 3, 3, 3, and 3. Row 6, again, is the same as that first row, right? 6, 3, 3. Oh, I'm sorry. 6, 3, 3. We repeat that. So it sort of bookends, which is a cool visual strategy. But we're going to go back to the 6, 3, 3. So we can go back up to row 3 where we've got 6, 3, 3. We can just copy and paste that. And that would finish our row. That finishes row 6. And then row 7 is just one column. But actually, it's two columns, but with text in them. So you don't really see the boxes as clearly as you would with these rows. But there is still essentially, I would say, two columns. And so I would call this, and I'm just sort of guessing here, it looks like, without getting too complicated, it looks like this is, let's just call this 6 and this 3, and then we'll work from there. So 6 and 3, you can just kind of copy and paste from a previous row. And then the last row, row 8, is this just footer thing. There's no columns in that, so we can just leave that. Okay, so we've got all of our. So what's interesting is we've got all of our HTML in place now. So what I'll do now is I'll make some changes to CSS, and you'll kind of see the layout come to life. Okay, the next step we'll do is we'll make some changes in CSS to sort of make our layout a little more box-like. Because right now there's really nothing in our HTML other than divs. So one really cool thing that you can do if you use Chrome is that you can right-click and click Inspect. And you can actually see the HTML and the CSS of really any website. And what we'll do now is I'm going to get the heights for each of these rows. So that we can make them into boxes. So as you can see, the height of this first row is 73 pixels. So I'm just going to write that down, 73 pixels, just in my notes. So this hero image, the height is 510 pixels. Write that down. And then all of these boxes are the same height. So I just need to figure out what the height of one of these boxes is. And that's 333 pixels. And then this thing at the bottom looks like it's 443 pixels. And then this little orange strip is the same as the header, also 73 pixels. So we've got the height of our elements. What I want to do now is I just want to add some of those heights to the different elements in our CSS. Okay. So we've got our CSS file here. Let's start with header. So we know that our header is going to be, what did I say? 73 pixels. So we'll set our header to 73 pixels. And then let's also just set our header with this background color. Let's see if we can figure out what this background color is. It's right here. It's D13328. I'm just going to copy and paste that. We'll set our background color to D13328. Okay. So let's actually take a look at that change in our HTML. That would have been here. Oh no, 12 column grid. Where are these saved? Let me find out where this file is saved. File, save as. I'm just going to save these to my desktop real quickly. File, save as. Okay, so 12 column grid.html. Let's open it up. Okay, so we've got at 73 pixels, which is great. We've got it the color we want, which is great. It doesn't really look like the escape committee because the escape committee is a full width. So what we can do then is, just for the purposes of trying to make it look similar, we can change this to 100% in our container. So again, I talked about this earlier. And then I can reset, and you can kind of see now it's spanning the whole thing. Okay, great. All right, what we'll do then is let's move on to the hero image. So we've got a class called hero image, and we know that the height of the hero image needs to be 510 pixels. So what we'll do is we'll go .hero-image, and we'll change our height to, what did I say, 510 pixels. And let's just pick, since we don't have any images downloaded or anything, let's just pick a background color. I like to use this flat UI color picker. If you just Google flat UI colors, it's really cool. Since it's a sort of orange layout, we'll just pick a color and just use, we're just going to use colors as our placeholders for now, just so you can see the shape of the layout. So what I'll do now is I will refresh, and you can see that there is now the height of our hero image is matching the height of their hero image. You'll notice that there's some padding and things like that that we'll have to take care of, but we're not going to worry about that right now. Okay, we'll just leave this all how it is right now, and then once we get to the next video, we'll make it really sort of match the layout. Okay, so row 3, we know that the height of all of these elements needs to be 333 pixels. So let's look at our HTML. So all of these divs, 6, 3, etc., needs to be 333 pixels. But the problem is that we don't necessarily want to change. We don't necessarily want to put a height on the class 6 or 3, because if we end up using these classes again in the website, somewhere else in the website, we may not want them to be a height of 333 pixels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a separate row or a separate class called row 3. Sort of inside of the row, so that we can then change styles of the height on these elements. So what we'll do is, in CSS, what you can do is you can specify, I want to change just these classes inside of this particular class. So the way you can do that is you can do call up row 3 and then a space and then do 6 and then do 3. Or I'm sorry, row 3, 6 and then row 3, 3. So basically what I've done here is I've said a class of 6 inside of the row 3 div, or a class of 3 inside of the row 3 div, let's set a height on. So let's set height 333 pixels. That way, if we ever use 6 and 3 again in the layout somewhere on another page or just somewhere else in the layout, it won't automatically have a height of 333 pixels. So what we'll do now is we'll refresh, and we won't actually be able to see that, so we have to pick a color. I'm just going to pick a random color. And then I'm going to refresh again. And so you can see row 3 now is got the 6, 3, 3 layout, which is 6, 3, 3. So again, it's not going to look exactly like this website, but we just want it to look similar to the layout, right? We want to emulate the layout. Okay, great. So the next thing we'll do is we'll move on to row 4, and again, I'm going to create this I'm going to create this additional div class row 4. I'm going to create this additional style so that I can make changes to 3, 6, and classes 3 and 6 without making a change to all 3s and 6s. Okay, so we'll do basically the same thing here, but we'll change this row 3 to row 4. And what I'll do also is I'll change the background color so you can see the differences. Let's use C Buckthorn. So save it. And so you can kind of see 3, 6, 3. And actually, let's use a different color that's more contrasting so you can really see. So in row 4, we've got 3, 6, 3. So again, we're just emulating the layout. It's not going to look exactly the way that it's supposed to, but it's going to be close. And then row 5, let's go back to our HTML. So row 5, which is here, I'm going to also create another style called div class row 5. Close it there. And then we're going to do the same thing again. So we'll just call this row 5, row 5. And then we'll change the background color to something new, something lighter. So change the background color. So row 5, we'll refresh, and there's row 5. So you can kind of see where the columns are starting to line up. Right, so you've got these 4 in a row. That's what we've got down here, these 4 in a row. And then the last one is going to be row 6. Right here. And so I'll create div class. And you can call these anything you want. I just thought numbering them sequentially would make sense. So we're going to do the same thing with row 6. So we're going to copy and paste that and just change this to 6 and 6. And then a new background color again. Maybe something darker. Refresh. And then we're back to that 633 layout. So 633. Okay. So again, it's not really looking like the website because it's just colored boxes, but you can see that we are emulating sort of the order, right? So 633, 363, 3333, 633. So we've got that same thing going on here, 633, etc., etc. Okay. So the last thing we need to do then is the column 7, I'm sorry, row 7 and row 8. So row 8 just has, we'll just call this, what should we call this? Should we call this footer? It's not really the footer though. I'm just going to call this div class last. And this is the last thing you see on the page. So what I can do now is call up last. We said it had a height of 73 pixels. That thing on the bottom, 73 pixels. And the background color matched the header, which is this. So we can just copy and paste that. So the last thing is this sort of stuff in the footer here. What we'll do is we'll actually call that our footer. So that would be row 7. So I'm going to call this div class, or actually I'm just going to call this footer. And close that right here, right before the the 7th row. And then we'll just change the color of the footer and the height of the footer. So the height of the footer was 443 pixels, and then we'll just use a background color of this honey color. Okay. All right, so this should be it. So all the way from the top to the bottom. So we've got the same color on the top and the bottom. This is that footer content, and this is that last content. So that's it. So we've laid out in boxes the Escape Committee website, and what we'll do in the next video then is we'll actually insert some text and some images to really make it look like the Escape Committee website. But essentially, in terms of layout, we were able to do that using this 12-column grid fairly easily, right? And so to just really recap the process, what we did is we took this grid that's existing already that you'll just copy and paste into your CSS file, and we'll do the first thing we did is we counted the number of rows, right? We said there's 8 rows, and so we inserted those rows into our HTML document. Then the next thing we did is we said, okay, well, how many columns are in each row, right? So there was only 1 column in this row, only 1 column in this row, and then 3 columns going on at various combinations of width. And we inserted those columns into the rows in our HTML. And then the next thing we did is we determined the height of our elements based on our layout. And we added the height to new divs that we included inside of each row, right? Because again, we didn't want to make the changes to height on just our grid elements. We didn't want to make the change to just 6, because if we added another grid element of 6 on a subsequent page or a different page, we wouldn't want to pigeonhole that particular element as a particular height. So what we did is we added more descriptive divs inside of our rows, and we called up in CSS those specific divs and made changes to those specific divs. So that's it. That's really laying out your website on a grid. Hopefully you found that helpful. And then in the next video, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and take a look at making it actually look more like a website. All right.